Good evening. We have a new co-host this evening on Week in Review, and we'll be discussing the Obama administration and religious freedom in the United States. We'll also be discussing the Occupy Wall Street movement and a new Love Craftian novel published this year. Good evening. I'm David Smith. I'm your host for Week in Review. Welcome. We have a co-host this week with us. His name is Eric Hoffman. He's in San Diego, California. And of course, I'm here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We'd also like to acknowledge our producer and audiovisual engineer, Daniel Moran, who is at the controls and making sure that everything runs smoothly for our production this evening. Tonight, I'd like to begin with a continuation of our discussion on the Catholic bishops and the target of the Obama administration on religious freedom in the United States. Yesterday, the case of Hosanna Tabor, a Lutheran school, versus the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission went before the Supreme Court for oral arguments. Did you hear about this, Eric?
Yes, I did hear something about it.
And
it's, well, I'll let you go on before I offer my opinion.
Okay. Just to briefly update everyone on this case, if you're unfamiliar with it, Hosanna Tabor is a Lutheran school of the Lutheran Missouri Synod, and they had a teacher who was no longer able to fulfill the duties due to a medical condition. She took medical leave. The school hired a new teacher to replace her for the remainder of the year. She apparently recovered enough to believe that she could return to work, and she notified Hosanna Tabor Church that she would be coming back to work, and they notified her that they had already hired someone else to fill that position for the remainder of the year. At which time she decided to sue. The church has a policy of mediation in order to solve any disputes between the church and its employees, which is part of its employment contracts, apparently. This case has now gone on, finally arriving at the Supreme Court, and now the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is involved, claiming that the state has some interest in assuring that this woman retains her job, and it affects the church's ability to hire its own ministers. There's a ministerial exception granted to churches whereby their employment practices are not subject to state or federal statutes because they are a religious body. And why don't you jump in here, Eric, and give me your understanding and your opinion.
This is an outrageous example of overreach, because all the first Americans came over here for religious freedom, to get away from this, to get away from the Church of England, or even in Germany, get away from the kings appointing their ministers and bishops. This is just an outrageous overreach and totally un-American. It's just totally against the spirit of the country, the spirit of the Constitution. This is the First Amendment, freedom of religion.
I know. I was thinking of the James I, the King of England, who came up with the idea of the divine right of kings, and we are sort of having, although it's not a king, it is an oligarchy that seems to think it has some right above the citizenry to determine what is in the interest of the state and what is not.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of political theorists, especially on the left, that think the sovereignty of the country resides in the bureaucracy of the government and not the community of the people.
Which is how we would, I think You were mentioning to me the other day Francisco Suarez and uh, his
Yeah,
point
pretty
that
much the father
the legislative power resides in the people and is
in the
given to the
community. Yes,
ruler to be exercised so long as it's exercised justly.
that's true. And Francisco Suarez is pretty much the father of international law. Anybody who talks about natural rights and rights theory, it all goes back to Suarez eventually.
Well, this case, I think, along with the other issues that the Catholic bishops have been concerned about, are going to lead to probably a rather serious confrontation with the administration during this election cycle.
I would think so. Religious freedom is, like I said, if it's not the number one American tradition, it's pretty close.
Well, I know
I would say it's probably I'd say it's probably the primary tradition of America.
well, I know the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have joined with the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church and many other churches in this Hosanna Tabor case, probably providing amicus curiae briefs to the court on these particular issues.
I think this is just another example of the Obama administration's overreach. They have just usurped way more authority than any American government should have.
I find it interesting that the administration is willing to pursue this issue, but it's not willing to defend the Defense of Marriage Act, which is the law of the land as well.
Well, you might remember when they first took office how long it took them to get an ambassador to the Vatican because they couldn't find anybody that wasn't pro-choice.
That's true. I had not remembered that. I'm glad you reminded me of that.
Yeah, it took them almost 2 years to find an ambassador to the Vatican.
For the other issue I have found interesting just is this issue. It's become somewhat prominent, is county clerks who are refusing to officiate at same-sex marriages or unions based on religious opposition. Now, I have a strong belief that if you cannot fulfill the duties of the office, you should probably resign the office. But that applies also to the president. If he cannot defend the Defense of Marriage Act as the chief magistrate of the land, then perhaps he ought to step down as well.
Yeah. Well, actually, I would say the clerks are within the right. Like I said, since this is a moral and religious issue, and this is really what the country was founded over, as far as I know, only totalitarian regimes force their clerks to go totally against their conscience. And it's just a minor thing. You can just bring somebody else in to do it. I mean, I even heard in Germany in the SS, if you didn't want to be a camp guard, you could get out of it.
Well, this is an issue that I think is going to burgeon as we move forward into next year, and
oh yeah, I would agree with you that nothing as good is going to come of this. I see a confluence of bad things happening.
An overreaching government and a failing economy are not a good recipe.
No, and Eric Holder's just, like you said, he's just basically dropped the ball for what an attorney general is supposed to do. He's not supposed to make policy. He's supposed to enforce the laws of the land.
Well, that's a definite problem. And what do you think Suarez would have made of this, given that he is, although he lived some 400 years ago, his insights and ideas are still relevant in the field of international law?
Well, I think he would think this is totally an overreach of government over the rights of the community.
And what would I understand? The community has an obligation to oppose the government when it overreaches.
Yes.
Sort of
Yes.
Benjamin Franklin's.
Yeah. Well, we're fortunate that we can oppose the government at the ballot box.
Well, let's hope people take this seriously and look into it and form an opinion and an understanding of the situation, and realize the seriousness of the issues.
I would definitely encourage anybody listening to look into it and maybe look up Francis Suarez's philosophy on Wikipedia or somewhere and familiarize themselves with what's really happening here.
Well, we'll probably be coming back to this issue many more times in the future as the situation develops. There's the case of Galinsky versus the United States Office of Personnel Management that we mentioned last week, and that case will no doubt be going to the Supreme Court. And there's another issue of religious freedom, I think, that's going to come up there, because it deals with DOMA and those issues of life and family that seem to be very important.
I think you're doing quite a duty, David, to the country to follow this issue.
If you don't mind, I'd like to move on. Last week, I wanted to cover the Occupy Wall Street because it's so significant, and it, of course, continues to be an important issue in our national life. But with the death of Steve Jobs, I thought we needed to cover that since he was such a significant individual in American business, entertainment, technology, etc. But what do you make of this Wall Street movement?
It's a very curious mixture of people. Obviously, some of it's probably grassroots, but a lot of it seems contrived or supported from, labor unions, big money, George Soros. And I've even heard they're sending protesters away whose signs aren't in tune with the other protesters. I've heard that Ron Paul protesters were sent away, that they couldn't join the group. So this argues against it being really a democratic movement.
It seems, I understand, to have a strong influence from the SEIU.
That's what I've heard, too, that this was actually, I can't authenticate it, though, so I really don't want to say, but there are rumors that the SEIU has been planning this for a long time.
And also there's the presence of the Transit Workers Union. Of course, I think they had perhaps a legitimate complaint that the police were commandeering buses to transport people whom they kettled in mass arrests, such as the one on the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
And, so they may have a legitimate issue there.
Yeah, but at some point I've heard small business owners around these protests, and they can't do business. These people are coming in, invading their businesses, demanding to use the bathroom, sleeping in the stores.
These are elements that are really not being covered. I know I've watched a few different varieties of media on these issues, on this particular issue. Over the past 2 weeks, there are some things I've heard absolutely nothing about. That is one of them. The small business owners in the area, how are their businesses being impacted?
They're basically, they've dropped 40 to 50% of business, most of them, what I've heard say on the radio, the ones that call into the programs. And everybody's complaining about the smell. I guess a lot of these people haven't taken a shower since they got there.
Well, I saw that they did the massive cleanup of Liberty Plaza this morning, when the mayor, Bloomberg of New York, indicated that they were going to actually shut down the park in order to clean it, and of course the protesters were afraid that they would not be allowed to get back in.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that may have been the
unfortunately,
case, but
Bloomberg has unfortunately proved to wimp out on this. He has a duty to protect all the citizens of New York, and I'm wondering how many of these people are really from New York and haven't come from somewhere else.
kind of wondering about that. There's also an issue which I was not aware of until the other day, and it's apparent anti-Semitism that's developing there among some of the protesters, and it's quite evident. It's not hidden. It's out there in the public, but it's not, to my understanding, being reported very widely, if at all.
Yeah, it seems like the media is media that really likes the protesters, and they've seemed to have been covering up some of the, what do you want to say, some of the boils and welts.
Well, I'm going to ask Daniel to play for us 2 video clips of some of the anti-Semitism that has been recorded there at Liberty Square, or Liberty Plaza, by individuals who were there to witness it and had uploaded it to YouTube. So, Daniel, if you would play those for us now, we'll continue our discussion after we see them.
I'm not. Are you stupid? I'm not stupid. Why am I against corporation? Because they don't pay me money. $7 an hour?
Go get a job.
I got a job, Mo. I do have a job. You're a bum, Jew. Man, I'm a Jew. Why are you fighting with us?
Why?
You got the money. That's why you're fighting, you Jewish man. We got the money.
Because I work for 40 years.
God bless. My father worked 40 years and we have a foreclosed house. My mother's dead because she had a hard time from stress. You tell the corporation to stop calling my mother.
What?
What?
No, I don't understand what you're saying.
You can't even speak English? Are you Israeli? Go back to Israel.
Why should I go back to
Israel.
Wall
Go back
Street
to
got
Shalom,
bailed out, the
Israel.
American people got sold
If you
out.
know so much, why don't you go and change the country?
I am right now.
You're not changing
I
anything.
changed
The
it.
American people got sold out, the banks got bailed out.
I have a job. I'm a college graduate. I'm in the local 1 plumbers union. Who are you to tell me I need a job? Look at you, you short little man. Go away. You want to argue? I don't want to hear you.
You're the one that's your answer.
Bye. Keep it moving.
No, I'm not. You're occupying the place over here. Don't
Occupy Wall Street.
Anti-Semite, Nazi, Hitler you, Hitler Jugend, you anti-Semite.
Take a piece of this.
I'm a Jew and I'm not that.
I don't care what you are. Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech.
Anti-Semite.
Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech.
Freedom. It's anti-Semitism.
This is not Israel. This is not Israel. Freedom of speech. Google Wall Street.
You're disruptive and
You're stupid. Hey, buddy.
you're racist, anti-Semite.
Hey,
You're Hitler, you Hitler.
take it, buddy.
Racist, anti-Semite.
Freedom of speech.
Well, that was somewhat disturbing. Has
What's even more
has the flavor of sort of the whole situation is has the flavor of Weimar Germany.
Yes, it does. A young guy disrespecting an older Jewish gentleman. Yes, and what's even more disturbing is when you watch the video, there's people in the background holding signs, and no one steps up and tells the guy, maybe you should calm this down.
That's true. That was I found the youth of the man in the first clip somewhat disturbing. I wouldn't have expected that from someone quite so young. He was obviously in his early 20s. I would not have expected that, given the general attitude and atmosphere in the United States. I
Yeah.
found that somewhat disturbing.
Oh yeah, it's a very disturbing clip. And like I said, no one stepped in. None of the people in back of him stepped in and said, "Hey, cool it down," you know.
There was an interesting. We didn't play the entire second clip due to time constraint, but someone in the back, in the full clip, someone in the crowd in the back asked the gentleman holding the sign, "Did you just get out of a car from Fox News? And are you being paid to hold that sign?" So apparently there may be some attempt to agitate, to stir up the situation, but nonetheless, it's not a good thing to have this going on, especially in New York, which has such a large Jewish population.
No, I think that if the snow and the rain doesn't dissipate this, or if it doesn't come quick enough, yeah, this is going to end in some sort of mob violence.
Well, I noticed that they're concerned about this. Some writers, editors that I've seen on various articles on the web are concerned about what's going to happen if this does drag on too long. There's going to be some confrontation between the Tea Partiers and the Wall Street occupiers.
And as we said, aside that, businesses are losing money, and I've heard rumors that a lot of Wall Street's not happy with New York anyway. They could all pack up and go to Hong Kong tomorrow.
Oh, that's true, and we would lose the...
and then we'd lose the financial, yeah.
Yeah, the financial
more,
would disappear from
yeah.
New York.
Yeah. So yeah, this is very disturbing. Because like I said, if they make it hot enough for them or uncomfortable enough for these guys, they do have enough money to leave. And there's plenty of cities that would welcome them.
Well, you know, they had the protest that went to the homes of some of the very wealthy individuals in New York. They carried their protest to the home of David Koch, Jamie Dimon, some of the other, Rupert Murdoch, some of the other very wealthy people in New York City. And apparently this had been organized and suggested for quite some time. And it was apparently organized by the SEIU, that particular union that seems to have a great deal of influence with the administration.
Yeah, the SEIU is tending to become the purple shirts of this administration, isn't it?
Yeah. So where do you see this? Do you have an opinion? Do you have an idea? Have you looked far a bit ahead to see where you think this might be going?
The longer it goes on, I'm expecting to hear of massive violence any day. The longer it goes on, these people are just going to get more and more riled up in the street.
Well, I know they raided the Occupy Boston earlier this week, the police, and just this morning they raided Occupy Denver. The police went in.
And they also got rid of Occupy San Diego today too.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yes.
So
yeah, because the streets were getting trashed and everything else. Yeah.
Not with much resistance, I suppose.
No, not with much resistance, because the parks are for all the people, not for people to live in.
Yes. Well, that's one of the issues that's kind of this plaza apparently is provided by a private a company, but it's for public use. And I'm a little confused about how that works. Apparently there's some constitutional issues about that.
Yeah, I am too. We'll have to do more research into that.
Yeah, that's kind of an issue. There was a lawyer named Ratner with Society for Constitutional Law in New York who was discussing that issue. That there seems to be an issue about how a public park can be privately owned.
Yeah.
So Zuccotti, I guess the Zuccotti family originally owned that. It's named after the chairman of the board of the company that actually owns the park, supposedly. But how it can be a public park and be privately owned, I'm not quite clear on that.
Well, I think the best thing we can do is to keep following the story and see where it goes. And everybody out there should
it will
pray for
continue,
rain
but I'm
and
sure it
sleet.
can't continue the way it is. There's got to be some resolution. I understand they haven't even, the occupiers have not come up with any set of principles or demands or requests. They're just sort of
there's no request if there's something happens that they'll leave. No, it just seems to be an ongoing mob with no objective. That's why there seems to be no end to it, because there's nothing to meet for them to leave.
I heard someone refer to it as a giant rave.
Yeah.
That might be.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. It's how much of it is a protest movement, and how much of it is just people down there to have a good time.
Yeah, down there to have a good time. Enjoy it. Well, those are the two topics I thought we would discuss today. I wanted to talk briefly about a book, which you recommended to me, in fact provided me a copy of, and I started last night. You and I are both fans of H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes, big fans.
There's a new author, Graham McNeil, and he has authored a book called Ghouls of the Miskatonic. And now you have already read this. I've just started. Without going into too much detail so that I'm not deprived of the enjoyment of the book, could you tell us basically what type of book it is? In reading it, I've found that he's pretty close to the style of Lovecraft for those who enjoy his particular type of writing.
Yes, it's very near. It's truly in the spirit of Lovecraft, and Graham McNeil, I have to say, is one of the best rising new authors that I've come across. And he doesn't have the idiosyncrasies of Lovecraft style, so it's a lot easier, smoother reading. He has almost a lyrical style, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I noticed that. You get the spirit, but without, as you said, the idiosyncrasies that can make reading Lovecraft a bit difficult, because we're not accustomed to reading 18th century prose.
Yeah. But yeah, he's a great author, and it's a great story, and it's just told just great. You'll actually really like the characters by the time you get into it, and you'll say, yeah, this is a book that Lovecraft could have or should have written.
Oh, good. Well, we'll recommend that to our listeners if they enjoy H.P. Lovecraft, if you enjoy the genre of supernatural horror. It's an excellent book. It's a good entertainment, especially as we're coming up to Halloween in a couple of weeks. It might be a good book to get and perhaps read around a campfire while you're roasting marshmallows on Halloween.
That's true. Don't let the shoggoths get you.
Yes. Well, thank you, Eric, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And Eric will be joining us on a regular basis as our co-host. And he'll be helping me to decide topics and news articles. I'd like to recommend that you go to our website. Under topics, there are some interesting articles there. One I'd like to encourage everyone to read is the IEET, the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technology. There's an article there on how neuroscience can determine whether you're going to be a conservative or liberal simply on your brainwave patterns. So that's a very interesting article, and I'd encourage everyone to read that. Also, there's an article there called The Education Conspiracy, which may be the huge amount of student loan debt is probably the next big bubble to go bust. And a huge portion of the population is now saddled with a huge amount of debt that they are unable to repay, but are required to repay because it's a guaranteed government student loan. So that's a video that I would encourage everyone to watch to get an understanding of that particular issue. There's also an article there on wealth, influence, and power. It's a study that was done by a professor at the University of California at Santa Cruz. It was originally published in 2005. It's been updated and revised and republished in 2011, and we've posted it to the topics section of our website. I'd also encourage you to view that. It's a rather lengthy read, but it's certainly an interesting one. I'd also like to encourage you all to stop by Eric's blog at processidealism@blogspot.com. Eric is, in his academic endeavors, a philosopher and is working in the subject of metaphysics. And he'll have a book that will be published shortly. We're working on revising it and preparing it for publication. So please stop by. That's processidealism@blogspot.com. And
you're all encouraged to leave a comment.
yes, please leave your comments. It helps Eric understand how people are responding to his work, and of course with all authors, the readership's response is important to help the author understand how to revise their work or what particular areas or avenues they might want to pursue that are of interest to their readers. Well, that's it for this week, folks. We certainly hope that you'll join us. If you're listening to us live, please consider sending us comments. We are able to receive emails, and I can read those, and we can respond to them live in our broadcast. Until next week, we thank you for joining us, and we hope that you'll come join us again. This is David Smith, and this is Week in Review. You're treading water in the open ocean, and you see a shark coming toward you. You're supposed to put your head between your legs and do what? Submit your responses in the comments section below.